about that later and move on to something different. And sometimes you can't get them to give it up. Sometimes they're like a dog with a bone, and they're just not gonna stop until you. And so sometimes you just have to be quiet and let them kind of get it out, and kind of, let them sort of exhaust that thought, and then say, wow, the rain was really bad today on the drive over. And just try to just keep redirecting and redirecting until you can get them to kind of give something like that up. And then there's always medication. If they get to a point where they're so troubled by their thoughts that it's just constant, they just can't give these things up, and it becomes overwhelming for them. We don't want anybody to have to live that way. Nobody should have to live thinking that people are stealing from them or cheating on them or taking their things, or that's a horrible way to live. And so there are medications that we can use to help decrease those delusions and paranoias. All right. Any questions about that one? Okay. Now we're going to get into stage 6, and then, which is really the late sort of severe stage. And this is where they kind of really start to look ill. Their faces are more drawn. They have that very vacant look. In stage 6, they may eat like a horse, and yet they're still losing weight. Their body is wasting, their muscles are wasting. Everything that the brain does in our body, everything the brain tells us to do, is affected. And the brain is the control center of our body. As I hold my hands up here, it's my brain telling my arms to put my hands up, right? They begin to develop what we call apraxia at this stage. Apraxia is where we don't know how to use a simple item that we've used every day. So you put the food in front of them, and they're hungry, and the fork is right next to them, and they sit there and they look at it, and they look at you, and they look at it, and you realize they don't know how to pick up the fork anymore and use the fork to pick up the food and feed themselves. That's apraxia. And it becomes, putting your pants on. Now the shirt's on upside down and inside out because they don't remember how to do something as simple as put their clothing on. Something they've done a million times, right? The brain no longer can get them to do that. This is where we really start to see loss of words and the inability to string a whole sentence together. And a lot of times they'll string a whole sentence together, but it doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm going to go over to that when he gets there, and then that's going to happen with her, with that happening. Yep. And you're like, okay, right? And we agree, whatever they say. Yep. Because it's not hurting anybody, and they really need to tell us something. We need to listen and watch and see what they're trying to tell us. And we can ask questions. Are you hungry? Sometimes they'll say yes. Sometimes they'll say no. They may not know whether they're hungry. Most oftentimes, the biggest thing that they don't know is if they're cold and if they have pain, because their body, their brain cannot process that information the same way it used to be able to process it. So the parietal lobe of our brain gets damaged, and the parietal lobe is what helps us raise our temperature. That's why every dementia patient is always cold. In all of my career, I have never met a dementia patient who's hot. They are always cold. And we try here at Town Square to keep it 74, 75 degrees so the members are comfortable. My staff is sweating, but my members are comfortable. And we tell all the families, I don't care if it's August, if it's 94 degrees. Do not send your loved one to Town Square in shorts and a tank top. They're going to be cold. They need pants. They need a jacket that they can put on. We need nothing worse than feeling cold. It will make you irritable and angry and unable to engage when you're cold, and your basic needs aren't being met, right? Which brings me to another point, and I'm just going to bring this up briefly. At this stage, we oftentimes see a lot of infections happen: urinary tract infections, pneumonias, cellulitis, infections of the skin. One of the reasons that we see this in patients in stage 6 dementia is that their body can't fight infection the same way. When we go to the grocery store and put our hands on that nasty grocery cart, right? And we come home and later on that night, we don't feel so good and we get a little low-grade fever. That's our body fighting off that virus or bacteria that we came into contact with. Well, people with dementia can't do that because they can't raise their body temperature to fight off those environmental factors that we have. So that's why we see the urinary tract infections and the skin infections and the pneumonias and things like that, because they can't fight off those infections. A lot of times people are like, well, she's not wiping correctly, or she's sitting in a wet diaper. Well, that's part of it. But, there's always times when people are exposed to those types of bacteria and we're able to fight off those infections. But as they get older, they're not, right? So that's one of the reasons those things happen. All right. I think we hit all of those. All right, stage 7, which is very late stage severe dementia. Now, I will tell you, in my 20 plus years of doing this, I think I've seen 12 people die of dementia itself. So to die of dementia means you get all the way to the end of your life, and the reason that you succumb is because your brain can't tell your lungs to breathe and your heart to beat. It's very rare for people to not pass away of some other issue secondary to the dementia prior to getting to that stage. Now, we've had some young, very young people. I've had people with early onset in their 40s and 50s who I know are likely going to die of dementia because they're healthy otherwise. There's really nothing wrong with them. But the imbalance, and that's the other thing that happens, is the falls are going to happen. It's not if they're going to happen, it's when they're going to happen. Your ability to right yourself, if you take a misstep, most of us can, right? We trip, we don't look graceful, but we can stand back up. When you have dementia and your brain is damaged and you take a misstep, you fall. So you're likely to break a hip. You're likely to get one of those infections we talked about, a UTI, a pneumonia, a cellulitis, a skin infection that can cause you to become septic. You can have a stroke. You can have a heart attack. You can have many of the other reasons why we pass away. The majority of people with dementia will die from something else. So this is a very rare stage that we see. We do not see a lot of people in stage 7. And when they get into stage 7, they don't typically stay here for very long. They're typically bedbound, which means that they're unable to get up and walk. And so their skin integrity is at risk. They can develop wounds. Their nutritional status, they're not eating, they can't swallow. They can develop aspiration pneumonia. Many of these other reasons will be what takes them. So we really, these are the people who, just literally are sort of in a vegetative state. The brain is basically telling it to do. It's basic. Blink your eyes, breathe, get your heart to beat, swallow. And that's about it. It's such an upbeat topic, but you have to understand it, and you have to understand what's going to happen and the things that you're going to see. So you know what stage your loved one is in, and you know what you have to look out for so that you can continue to be that caregiver and that provider for them who is able to anticipate some of the behaviors, some of the things that are going to happen, and understand why they're happening. I think one of the hardest things for me is to help people understand that the person with dementia isn't giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. That they're not trying purposely to give you a hard time. They can't do the things that we oftentimes are asking them to do. And that's a real paradigm shift for us, especially in husband and wife situations. Questions?
When they get to that stage.
7?
Yeah, 6 or 7. Is there any reason to give them the
So donepezil is one of those medications that's a little sticky too, because we give it and we don't really know how much it's doing, right? I usually tell people, if it's not bothering you, you're not having any GI distress from it, it's not breaking the bank, continue on it until you get to about stage 6. If by stage 6, that's when you would stop taking it. The problem is let's say you started taking it in stage 3, right? And you were early diagnosed. Now you get to stage 5. And I have had this happen where the family's like, yeah, this isn't doing anything. and they stop it. And they come in and see me and they're like, wow, mom's had this rapid decline. Now she's incontinent. Now she's not. I can't get that back. I can't say, okay, well, let's put her back on it and we're going to get better. That's gone. So for me, I would rather say stay on it until you get to the point where you're at stage 6, where you're really not walking, your balance is really off, and then actually if the disease progresses, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to go from mild cognitive impairment very quickly, almost overnight, into a later stage? I mean, one thing for me was MCIPG,
Mm-hmm.
and then it seemed like there was this severe continuing to go down, and
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
just continuing.
Mm-hmm. I
Every
think
month I see something more.
right. Right. Again, a lot of it has to do with the type of dementia that they have, right? Alzheimer's disease tends to be a much slower progression. Vascular can have those rapid declines because in vascular dementia, there's multi-infarcts happening in the brain, which is causing them to lose function. And I know this wasn't the talk on the types of dementia, but it's very often, and I'm a real big proponent of this, that it's very rare that people have one type of dementia. A lot of times people have Alzheimer's and vascular. And because they've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, nobody ever really goes back and says, has he had high blood pressure for a long time and high cholesterol for a long time? And is it possible that he's having small little infarcts in his brain? It is very possible. I think when you get to a certain point in dementia, like mild cognitive impairment, stage 3 and stage 4 can last 4-5 years. And that's why when they get to stage 5 and the family brings them into us and I get to evaluate them and I say, your loved one is in stage 5, and they're like, stage 5, I only found out about this a year ago that he was having a problem. I say, well, this has likely been going on for 4 or 5 years, and your loved one has either been covering it up or hiding it or figuring out ways to not let you see it. And so I think with the mild cognitive impairment, especially with highly intelligent people who have the ability to sort of develop compensatory strategies, right? Ways to sort of still manage to do things, we don't see the decline until it really is apparent. And then it's so apparent that it seems like they're rapidly declining. And decline over a year is actually not really all that rapid. So, any other questions? No. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. Oh, sorry, Maureen. Yes, incontinence usually happens in late stage 5, beginning stage 6. And I use it actually as a real indicator for me as to when they're getting into stage 6. Um, so typically in vascular dementia, it can be fecal incontinence first. They have difficulty with bowel movements. In some of the other dementias, it's usually urinary incontinence that goes first. But for the most part, urinary goes first and then bowel. It's just that the brain no longer has the ability to tell the bladder it's full, empty. And so it waits until it's full and then it empties on its own. And that's where, again, it's really important to put them on a toileting schedule. And that's not, do you have to go to the bathroom? That's, come on, we're going to go to the bathroom. We're going to the doctor. We're leaving to go out. I have to go to the bathroom. You're going to go to the bathroom, right? Right. That's because his brain can't even tell his bladder to empty anymore. Yeah. 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 Yeah, when they're in late stage 5, early stage 6, sometimes you'll take them into the bathroom, you'll pull their pants down, you'll kind of stand there. A lot of times we have the gentleman sit because they will have that better sense that they have to urinate when they sit. Sometimes we run the water. Sometimes we put their hand in the water. Yeah, we try to do triggers for them to get them to go, right? And sometimes they don't have to go. They don't. What bothers me is when family members tell me that their loved one is peeing in the corner, peeing in the closet. that tells me that they really had to go to the bathroom and we missed the signs. We miss the signs, right? We want to get them in that bathroom every couple of hours so that they can hopefully empty that bladder. And sometimes just the coldness of pulling their pants down will trigger them to empty their bladder. But there's nothing worse than that sense of I have to go to the bathroom and I don't know where to go to the bathroom. Almost like that little scared child who goes and pees in the corner because they don't, that's what they're doing. And that's, to me, especially here at Town Square, very, very important to me that we make sure that they have that dignity and respect, that they're brought to the bathroom every couple of hours so they have the opportunity to empty their bowel and their bladder so that they don't feel that way. Right. Yeah. And so Maureen's question is that, you know, her husband will say he has to go to the bathroom, goes into the bathroom and then doesn't really do anything. He's in there for a while, comes back out and says, what was I in here for? Again, you know, he must have felt that he had to go to the bathroom, right? And so, and again, this is where it's really hard as a caregiver, Maureen. Like, do you really want to get out of bed in the middle of the night and walk with him to the bathroom and sit him down and make sure that he goes to the bathroom? But sometimes that's what's necessary because, to your point, he got into the bathroom and he was like, what am I here for? Because his short-term memory is so short. It might have been a fleeting feeling at the moment, or a lot of times, you know, again, we're so routine, right? We wake up in the middle of the night and we think, oh, I must have woken up because I need to go to the bathroom. But they really don't need to go to the bathroom, right? That impulse that's being sent to the brain is being read sometimes correctly and sometimes not correctly. So you know, it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes when they slip into being incontinent and now are just wearing incontinence products, sometimes that's easier, right? But you never want to tell somebody who's continent, just pee in your pants. My God, how disrespectful is that, right? So we have to sort of play that game of trying to get them to go to the bathroom and have the ability to urinate when they can.
My husband gets to the bathroom
Mm-hmm.
as soon as
He goes.
he goes all over the floor. I
Mhm.
scrub the floor
Yep.
4 times a
Yep.
night.
Yeah.
So they don't know what to do.
Well, again, that's another one of those. So again, we try to limit the amount of fluid that they have in the evening. Yeah, you know. And then the other thing that we try to do is we try some. I have some family members that will actually wake up in the middle of the night to wake their spouse up to take them to the bathroom before they have to really feel that urge. Some of that is just control. I know it's hard. That's a tough one. Times. And you're trying to have him stand in front of the toilet and go. No, you're trying to get him to sit. The other option for you is to get a urinal. And when he swings his legs over the bed, you get that urinal out and you have it right there ready for him to use. Because sometimes just the time that it takes him to get out of bed, wake up a little bit and get to the bathroom, that urine's coming. So, I mean, and nobody really wants to have a urinal or bedside commode, but it beats scrubbing the floor at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? So, and it's relatively, you know, and it's like the baby. I had 2 boys, right? You pull the diaper down and, you know, so, you know, the same idea is when you're, you know, moving his undergarment, if you can get that urinal in there fairly quickly, you may be able to save yourself some angst there. Okay. All right. Thank you all. Oh, I'm sorry. One more. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of schools of thought on this. I've been doing this for a long time as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I believe that the two most common psychiatric symptoms that go along with dementia are anxiety and depression, right? So the anxiety comes because we don't understand anything, right? And the depression comes because we've had multiple losses that we just don't understand either. And we're under a tremendous amount of stress all the time, which is burning out those receptors in our brain for using the neurotransmitters that make us happy. So my training and my school of thought is that when people are developing dementia and get into stage 3 or 4, at minimum, they should be on an antidepressant. The antidepressant helps bring serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine to our brain, which are all of our calming neurotransmitters, right? And if we get that started early enough, then the decline into cognitive impairment can be a little softer because they have those neurotransmitters to make their brain function a little bit better. Then, if we begin to develop the things like agitation, irritability, paranoias, and delusions, then we move up to the bigger guns, the antipsychotic medication, which, Rick Salty is now the new FDA-approved medication for agitation and Alzheimer's disease. So we can use some of those medications, one, to help the antidepressant work better, but also to give the person with dementia some calm. Okay. Yep. Yep. So, yep. Yeah. So there's a whole body of research that's being done now, and still some clinical trials. And Leqembi, which is the anti-plaque medication that is being given now through IV infusion, is to decrease the plaques in the brain. Again, you have to go through a relatively stringent screening to make sure that you actually have Alzheimer's dementia with the plaques. And then there's still some question as to whether or not, if you remove the plaque, does the person actually regain cognitive ability? Correct. Correct. So you have to catch it. Well, it's to dissolve it, right, and to keep it from worsening, for sure. But we don't have anything yet that can take somebody who's stage 5 and bring them back to stage 3. It's already damaged too much. Correct. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And that's what they're working on. Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. They're working on a blood test that look for biomarkers so that we can say to somebody, you have a biomarker that gives you a high probability of developing Alzheimer's. And guess what? Now we have a treatment that we can offer you early to decrease your risk of this happening. We're not there yet, but that's the thought process. Yes. Yes. I deal more in the world of they already have the disease. They're already, by the time they come to me, they're 4s and 5s. So. Right. Correct. Exercise and social engagement will do 2 things. Number one, we socially engage with people when we have conversation, we make eye contact, when we share a meal, we raise our own natural neurotransmitters. And so we feel better. We feel less anxious. We feel less depressed when we have social engagement. So that's number one. Number 2, exercise, or keeping the blood flowing in our brain, is always good for our body and for our brain, in order of keeping the brain as healthy as we possibly can. Again, none of these things are going to stop what's gone down. The idea is to slow the progression of the disease. Mm-hmm. That calling and talking to people on the phone is really, really difficult. It's very difficult for dementia patients. Right, but he just talks, but he doesn't really know what he's talking about. Right. Yeah. Yeah. You could let him just chat away like that, but the problem with the phone is that the other person, typically in a phone conversation, you ask people questions and they answer you. The one thing we tell you not to do with a dementia patient is don't ask them questions, because they're not going to be able to answer those questions. Now, for Bill, he naturally wants to go off on a tangent. We'll talk about whatever, and that works right now. But as time goes on and the kids call and say, hey, Dad, how are you? And he doesn't know how he is, how's he going to answer that question? And people with dementia need both auditory and visual cues. Am I smiling at you? Am I happy? Right? Because when you ask your loved one to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and you're smiling at them, then there's a positive response to that than when you're angry or scowling. And they see that and they can process that. Because from infants, that's one of the very first things we learn is how to recognize emotions by facial expressions. And it's very important with patients. And I tell my staff all the time, you need to be smiling all the time. Everything is happy and wonderful. It's hard for patients, even with dementia, to respond negatively to you when you're smiling at them. So, all right, great. Thank you all. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.